Hey everyone, I am here to talk to you today about laundromat due diligence. This is an area I see a lot of people have questions about, and honestly, a lot of people are going about their laundromat due diligence in the wrong way, which is understandable. If you've never owned a laundromat before, then you just don't know what you don't know. I see a lot of people asking questions that are not terribly relevant or just aren't going to get them to the information that's going to be most important in making a decision about whether or not you want to buy a particular laundromat. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the questions I hear people asking that are not very helpful and offer some alternatives that will help you do better laundromat due diligence. My least favorite question, and the one that I also see probably coming up the most, is how many machines do you have? I don't know what YouTube video everyone watched that told them this was the most crucial piece of information, but we gotta stop asking this question, guys. I'm just kidding. You can definitely ask this question, and I don't mean to say that machines aren't important. Machines are very important. They're the most important piece of equipment in a laundromat. When you're doing due diligence on a laundromat, you should certainly get an equipment list that has a breakdown of the machines, the brands, the age of the equipment, condition of it, etc. But when you're doing due diligence, you don't get a whole lot of useful information by just asking how many machines are there. If I tell you I have 13 washers and 8 double stack dryers, what information does that really give you? People also sometimes ask, what's the ideal machine to square footage ratio? And honestly, I have no idea the answer to that. Really, I think a more nuanced version of these questions get at a laundromat's capacity for growth. So if I were doing due diligence on a laundromat, yes, I would want to get that equipment list, but I would also want to ask, what's your current revenue and what is the capacity for growth? By that I mean, how much are the machines currently being used and how much opportunity is there to use them more? Because if I tell you my top line revenue is $20,000 a month and the machines are being used pretty much every hour of the day and there's no square footage to add more machines to the laundromat, then you know that based on how the business is currently operating, there's not more room for growth beyond raising prices. Growth would have to look like some creative solution, like maybe hiring an employee to do the wash and fold orders at a time when the laundromat is closed to the public. So sometimes when I tell people about my laundromat and how there are hours in the day when machines aren't being used, they think that's a bad thing. But actually, it's a really great thing because that means there's still room for my business to grow. As far as verifying the information about the usage of the machines, there are a couple ways you can go about it. A lot of laundromats these days use apps on their machines that allow people to pay with their phone or with a card, and these apps are typically also tracking how many times a day the machines are being used. So a seller could provide you with a report showing that information. But my preferred method is just to go to the laundromat yourself. Do a small load of laundry every day for a week or a few days in a week. Go at different times of the day. I guarantee you will learn more about the laundromat using this method than you ever could just looking at a P&L or an equipment list. Another question that's similar to this is, what are your vend prices or what are your wash and fold prices? Again, those are fine questions to ask. You should get that information, but without more context, it's not very helpful. A better question to ask would be, how do your prices compare to your competitors? If you find out that the prices are lower than the competitors, then that might tell you that there's room to raise prices after you buy the laundromat. Now, this is assuming that things are relatively equal. There might be a laundromat that's charging more for a reason. Maybe they have significantly better amenities. Maybe they've got a parking lot and they've got Wi-Fi and they've got seating for people to work while they're doing their laundry. So you do have to consider how the laundromat compares to the competition, and are there things being offered at other laundromats that justify higher prices. If the prices at the laundromat are higher than the competition's, then that might indicate to you that it might be some time before you can raise prices again. I really believe you shouldn't compete to be the lowest in the area. I think it's better to compete on quality. I'll say with my laundromat, we are not the cheapest wash and fold service. I know there are cheaper wash and fold services out there, but we do a really quality job. We make sure that people's clothes are clean, we make sure that they're folded well, and we have really great customer service. There are problems that come up at times, as with any business, and we really make an effort to respond to them promptly. And that is not the case with all wash and fold services. So it's fine to ask about prices, but just make sure you're asking about them in the context of the larger market. And if the seller doesn't have those answers for you, then you may need to do some research yourself. Before I raised prices at my laundromat, I went around to the other local laundromats and checked to see how much they were charging to make sure I was still within the market rate. I also hear questions about employees. Do you have good employees? The thing is, it doesn't really matter how good the current employees are because you don't even know for sure if they're going to be there after you buy the business. 2 days after we bought our laundromat, we're driving into the city and we get a call from the sellers that the employee they had had for a while just put in her notice. There's no guarantee that the employees are going to stay with the business. And honestly, that was really hard for us when we found out that the employee was leaving because we had really wanted to keep her. But ultimately, it did end up being a good thing because we got to hire someone who we selected, who we felt like was a really good fit for us. And we ended up being happy with how things turned out. There's also not, generally speaking, a requirement that you keep an employee after acquiring a laundromat. And I want to be clear, I don't believe in just firing people frivolously, but if you take over a business and someone's not doing a good job and you've tried to make things work with them and it's just not working out, you can't let that person go. So that's why I think asking about the current employees isn't terribly relevant because employees come and go. Now, I don't mean to say employees aren't important or that you shouldn't appreciate them. Employees are absolutely important and they're essentially how your business is functioning. They are providing the labor force that makes your business run. So it is really important to have good employees, but when you come in as the new owner, that's something that you can make your own decisions about. A better version of this question to ask would be, tell me about your current employee schedule and what the employees are responsible for. For my laundromat, I can say the times that my employees work is very relevant because when they're not working there, I have some additional responsibilities to be on the phone during certain hours. The schedule is also something that you as the new owner could change going in, but I think something that's really important is understanding as much as you can the current operations of the laundromat, getting accustomed to that, understanding why those operations and hours are in place before you make changes. You also really want to understand how much work the owner is currently putting in and what they are responsible for versus what their employees are responsible for and how they're paying themselves. The reason this is relevant is because if they are not paying themselves a salary or an hourly rate, which is totally fine, maybe they have pass-through LLC and they're just taking distributions, there may be some hidden cost there. And by that, I mean, let's say they're working there 20 hours a week, but they're not paying themselves a salary or an hourly rate. So you're not going to see the cost of that time show up in the wages line item on the P&L because they're not paying themselves there. They're paying themselves out of the distributions, out of the seller's discretionary earnings. So if you don't find out how much time they're putting in themselves, it could look like the business is actually making more money than it is. Put this another way, if you were to completely replace the hours that the owner was working with an employee, what would the cost of that labor be? And you want to understand, what are the employees actually doing? Are they cleaning? Are they doing the wash and fold? How many problems can they troubleshoot? What is the owner doing when they're coming in? Because you want to have a sense of what you'll be expected to do when you take over the laundromat. Another common question is, do you have issues with security? A lot of people are concerned about this, and fine, ask this question. But after you ask that, here's what you should ask next. What are 3 problems you've dealt with in the last month? If you're just asking about security, you could be missing out on a whole host of other problems that the owner has been dealing with. And if you ask them, hey, what are 3 problems you've dealt with in the last month? And they can't tell you, or they tell you there haven't been any problems, then they're either lying to you or they're not involved enough in the day-to-day operations of the business to be able to answer that question. And either of those things is a red flag. The truth is, every business has problems, laundromats as well as every other kind of business. And it's the owner's ultimate responsibility to figure out how to deal with those problems, whether it's hiring someone to delegate those problems to or fixing those problems themselves. But ultimately, the responsibility always comes back to the owner at the end of the day for how the business is operating. So what you'll need to decide as the prospective buyer is, are those problems that you are able to deal with or willing to learn how to deal with? And are those problems that you want to deal with? I love this question because it really reveals a lot. I think one thing it reveals is, what is the seller like? Are they someone who's willing to be transparent and tell you what those problems are? And you can really read how they answer this question. Are they hesitant to answer? Are you getting a little bit of a shifty response? And if so, that gives you a lot of information about how this deal could go down. If someone's not forthright with answering that question, I personally would be concerned about, is there anything that they're hiding from me? Is there anything that's going to come up later that is a big issue that they never mentioned? I think some sellers may be nervous to answer this question because they don't want to scare off buyers. But the fact of the matter is, I believe in doing ethical business. I believe in being transparent. And I also believe if you're selling a business, you should really be trying to find the right buyer. And if a seller is trying to paint a picture of a business as being perfect, that's just not realistic. So any business I look at in the future, whether it's a laundromat or something else, I will always be asking that question and really paying attention to how the seller responds. All right, well, those are my suggestions for how to ask better laundromat due diligence questions. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video, and also let me know what other questions do you have about buying or operating laundromats, and I'll be sure to answer them in future content.